All right, hello everyone. So today I'm talking to Katie Gray, who's the founder of Principles of Practice. And Katie is a former lawyer. And Principles of Practice, I think Katie has been running for about four and a bit years or something like that.
Yeah, around 4 to 5 years. That's right.
So we'll get into what motivated you to set that up. But before that, you were a partner in a global firm, and I think you started as a lawyer way back for Allen Arthur Robinson. Is that right?
That's right. Alan's was my second job. My first job as an article clerk was at Thine and McCartney, and we were still called article clerks back then. I did my 2 years of service as an indentured clerk there, and then I was working in banking and finance. So it was sort of a natural move for me to go to Alan's and then start sort of an international banking and finance law career from there.
I was going to say that must have been a big shift for you. I'll tell everyone what the topic is as well. We're talking today about difficult emotions that impact business development success in law firms. And Katie is a bit of an expert in this area. She's now an executive coach and she works in leadership development. And I think she's been around and around these issues for a long time. And obviously that experience of being a partner in a global firm, take a big breath with all the pressures that come. I can only imagine not only getting to that level in your career, like the work that you put in, but also the pressure of it. I mean, a lot of enjoyment doing things that intellectually are very challenging and stimulating. But you've obviously decided at some point that leadership development is really something that you're really passionate about. Do you want to just sort of explain that shift?
Yeah, and for me, it was this experience that I'd gone through my life, sort of always looking ahead the next sort of short period to achieve, and sort of kept on that track. And then once I did get promoted, I had to really take a look at my own leadership, and that's where the scales fell off the eyes, so to speak. And I realized I had a lot of places where I needed to grow and develop. And so I then went and got a coach, and I became very curious about how leaders develop, what makes an effective leader, what makes an ineffective leader. And really, just through that process, I realized that there were so many different skills and competencies that I needed that I didn't quite have yet. And then that curiosity just exploded and brought me to where I am today.
I think, emotions and leadership was a revelation to me too. And we're both accredited in the leadership circle. And that was my real beginning. I had to go and I went to do a leadership course because I was quite cynical about, my salary review. I didn't think it was going to go well. So I thought I'll go into the training budget and get something so I feel happy. Anyway, I went up and did this course and you had to do a leadership circle thing. And honestly, I loved it. And it opened my eyes. And where I got what I thought was negative feedback, I was blaming everyone else, those bastards, but it was actually revealing things about myself that deep down I knew. I just thought no one could see them. But everyone could see them. They were probably, yeah. So it was a real eye opener for me. And once I did that, I was a bit like you. I was like, wow, I need to know more. And the hardest part was it was really about myself first. I thought it would be about everyone else's leadership. I was very comfortable there with everyone else's leadership. Everyone else is failing. I had a real kind of, in my mind, I had one of those kind of, oh, wow. There's a real lot of learning to do, isn't there, about yourself before you can then start thinking about leadership of others.
Yeah, that's absolutely, that was my experience too. There's big, well, who am I? Inside, I felt as though I was still a 15-year-old girl, still feeling very sort of naive in the world. But what other people saw was a really hard taskmaster. So how did I sort of correlate these two different parts? Were just so different, how I felt about myself and how other people perceived me.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I've since seen people with leadership circle profiles, really, really quite wounded, particularly by the reactive stuff. But then, once they're supported, I think, to sort of understand that reactive side of the profile and what it tells you about the creative aspects of your leadership as well, and where you might need to grow and where you're perhaps overusing things. I have seen that real I think almost like a come to Jesus moment. They've kind of, the penny's dropped,
Mhm.
and there is nothing, I think, more powerful for people when they've had that shock. And then they're able to move forward.
Absolutely. And what's I think is great about that tool is that it looks at two very powerful emotions. In that reactive, we're talking about that fear-based world. And in the creative, we're looking at love. So we're looking at what do we love doing? What do we want to create? What's sort of motivating us forward rather than causing us out of fear to react.
So I probably should always put an explainer at the beginning of these interviews. I never stick to the plan. Obviously, we're now talking about the leadership circle, but it is related. It is related. So anyone who is watching this recording, I was talking to Katie before about, well, why do I do them? Well, Sally, why do you do them? I do them because I think working in law firms is hard. Working in any professional services environment is hard. And the more authority that you get in those systems, the more challenging it gets in a way. And I have found that knowledge and understanding myself better and learning from other people who've had similar experience and been able to grow has really helped me get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're talking about difficult emotions that impact business development, obviously, because I come through everything with a business development lens. And obviously, like with Katie, you don't get to be a partner in a global unless you've had some eye on business development. And you will know, I guess, some of the ups and downs of that, and we're going to be talking about that today. So probably, Katie, where we should kick off is, what do we mean by difficult emotions? So when you're talking about difficult emotions, I mean, I guess I could challenge you and say, aren't all emotions good?
Yeah. And that's why I call them difficult, not positive or not negative and positive, not good and bad. So my understanding and my belief is that all emotions are valid and helpful. They may not be helpful to get us to where we want to go. And that's where we need to sort of use our emotional intelligence skills. But the emotion itself is sending us a very important message. And if we don't listen to that well, then that's when things can be quite even more difficult. So those difficult emotions, I suppose another way of classifying those are as the uncomfortable emotions, or, the emotions that don't feel so great. But they're still sending a very valid message for us to pay attention to.
So some of the emotions that I've seen, as head of clients and markets and director of BD in firms for many years, are with fee earners, is this reluctance around business development. Just do not want to do it. Go away from me. It's not what I signed up for. And then to outright hostility. And then you get people who are just beaten by it. Like, I just don't know what I'm doing. I've got my performance review coming up. I'm really, it's not going to go well. Can you help me? And we're like 2 weeks away from the review. Probably not. You probably need to start ages ago. Avoidance, real, I think, fear around comfort zone and having to go to events and talk to people. And the thing builds up in people's minds, not having a list, going to an event and not being able to access a list before, and the panic and that can cause aggression.
Mm-hmm.
On the BD side, I think being the receptacle for that or the scapegoat of that, but also not having that understanding, not having that awareness of what's driving those, difficult emotions. And here we are swirling around trying to get results and trying to get work in the door. And a lot of these things go unsaid,
Mm-hmm.
unspoken. It just ends up with, oh, really, she's difficult, avoid him, hopeless over and then you've got the people who are actually, a few people who are actually able to embrace the task and sort of get it. But so some of that, do you want to talk about that, I guess, in your time as a lawyer, probably, and then probably perspective as a coach? Maybe those two lenses would help.
Yeah, for sure. And I a lot of those that you were speaking to sounded to me as though they were driven out of the fear of going to the event, not knowing anybody, driven out of the fear of being asked a question that you can't answer and looking stupid because you're meant to be the advisor who has all of the answers. So what I hear, as you're talking about that, is these tactics, the doing that people implement to try to alleviate that feeling of fear.
Yeah.
And rather than actually doing something with the emotion itself, it's doing stuff on the surface to try to mitigate that emotion. And what we can do instead, and this comes out of the work of Susan David on emotional agility, and it's really part of that emotional intelligence piece, is that if we can understand the emotion and say, well, hey, I'm feeling fear right now, this is what I'm scared of, and we can articulate that, we can then sort of be a bit more compassionate with ourselves. Because of course, you might be, that might feel a little bit scary going into that room and not knowing anybody. But then you can work with yourself to sort of move through that emotion and think, well, what would be a more productive or resourceful emotion for me to go into that room with? And that could be an emotion of excitement, or an emotion of, or just even being friendly and open in that room. Because what a lot of people do is that fear goes unacknowledged and because there's a lot of other external, oh, well, that's because she didn't give me the list. That's because and we're sort of not acknowledging the elephant in the room. And so it bubbles in and it walks right into that room with you. And that's the emotion that you're spreading around the room if it hasn't been acknowledged, if it hasn't been dealt with. So that can be sort of some of those impacts that without acknowledging what's going on for you internally, it is coming with you and being sent out.
Oh, so that's that idea of the contagion, like emotions being contagious. And I think anyone who's watching this, who's been in a partner meeting or been in a team meeting and something's gone wrong, and we're looking for someone to blame, you can feel that. Sometimes you can feel it. So one of the issues, I think, and I'm probably more attuned to this now, particularly since I did that research into business development with lawyers, and I spent one-on-one time with them, and I saw that my thing now is about law firms are incredibly busy places. I had someone once sent me an email, equivalent position to me, saying, well, I'd love to get back here, but I feel I don't have time to pee right now. It's how tuned in to the self do you need to be aware of the emotions. But the other thing in firms is this vulnerability. It's a sort of like no vulnerability zone. You can't really have a chink, in air quotes, because if you're vulnerable at all about your emotions, it's almost like you're an underperformer or something. I mean, I haven't really made full sense of that, but there's something about emotions are not something that are really, they're there, but no one's talking about them in a way that's kind of helpful or shining a light on them. Do you think you always need external help to do that? Like, is it an awareness thing? There's a lot in that. There's about 3 questions in there. So take your pick.
Well, first on the vulnerability piece, it's quite ironic in some ways, because a lot of lawyers I speak to, and certainly my own experience, feel vulnerable. They feel as though they're beholden to whatever that revenue figure is, or whatever any sort of metric is that they're being assessed by. So that feeling of vulnerability is absolutely there. And I think most people will open up and admit it, to certain people, but it's definitely bubbling under the surface that people feel, and will say things like, you're only as good as your last year. Like these are things that people are communicating this in language. If they're not communicating it in emotional speak, they're certainly communicating the sentiment in their language. And in terms of, do people need support and help to unearth this? At times, yes. Some people, there's sort of there's 2 different experiences with emotions. There's the cognitive. So if you know cognitively what an emotion, if you can name an emotion, if you know what it means, and you know all the cognitive pieces, but then there's that other piece about actually the feeling of it, if you can feel the emotion and connect that to the cognitive. And so there's a real skill both by working with somebody, whether that's a counselor, a therapist, or a coach, to really understand the emotions at both sort of levels, the cognitive and the sort of felt experience or the embodiment of that emotion. Can certainly be helpful in order to help you really live a more fulfilling and productive life once you sort of acknowledge yourself more holistically, and then can be empowered by having that information that's being sent to you by the emotions, by being able to use that, choose an emotion that's going to be very, to use that, process that emotion, and select an emotion that's really going to help you achieve what you're setting out to achieve.
Yeah, you're right about that. I mean, I think there are all those private conversations, aren't there, that happen between people that you trust and allies and alliances in firms where people speak quite openly about how they're feeling, like who's persecuting who's, the envy of people who are having a bit of a dream run. There's a lot of that stuff goes on. But that idea of being able to recognize the emotion for yourself is sort of like step one. So if you're feeling pressured around business development, or you're feeling at a loss around business development expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about what you're saying is being able to sort of stop and say, this is an emotion. There is a process here, and you can do this privately to yourself. No one really needs to know. But if you can do that, it won't get the better of you. Because you can then be the master of yourself, I guess, by taking back a little bit of emotional control rather than being just buffered around by these feelings that because I find sometimes that with business development anyway, earners aren't really talking about emotions at all. They're not so much tapping into that emotion. It's just the pressure.
Yeah, so there's one question that I sort of ask clients when I'm working with them. Well, and it's almost getting them into that headspace of thinking, right, before I go into this interaction, what's the mood or emotion I want to bring into that room?
Yeah, fantastic.
And most people don't even think about that. They'll just go in thinking cognitively, but not about what they're going to emit in terms of the energy that they're sending into that room.
Yeah, that's a fantastic tip. If you only did that, you probably go, and it's not about making it easier for anyone else. That is really a helpful. I mean, other people will benefit because you're perhaps more self-aware. But then if you do that for you, then that awareness can help you because you can be in that meeting and understand what's going on for you and what you might need to do for you, rather than be subject to these kind of anonymous feelings, which you can end up feeling angry and more frustrated or victimized or not heard or punished.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you can also send your antennae up to, and I believe part of that active listening is beyond just listening, it's presence. And if whoever you're interacting with, whether that's a client, prospective client, a colleague, if you're able to almost tune into what they are feeling, it can really help orient your conversation towards something that's going to be helpful. We're not just thinking about two heads talking together or two mouthpieces talking and just on the cognitive. We're talking much more about how we are connecting with somebody else, being fully present, really bringing in all of that information that's available to us in terms of how might they be feeling about this situation, and how can we then navigate our conversation, not just in our spoken words, but in the whole way that we bring ourselves to that conversation so that it's effective.
Yeah, and I think that's right. Like with clients as well, it's obviously a really beneficial thing, particularly if you're going in there and again, something hasn't gone well, you're thinking that it's going to be a difficult conversation, wanting to keep the client or wanting to, do more work for the client or just sort of, fix whatever problems come up now that's been unexpected. This idea of really tapping into these, what are the emotions that I'm feeling before you go in, and what am I bringing into the meeting? What's going to be picked up by the other person, the other side? I mean, some people I see in law firms are masters of this, litigators in particular are very good and get very good at reading the room. I sometimes think of them as like super duper Texan poker players or something. Like they're very good at that. But that I think for the general masses, I think particularly for more junior lawyers, some of those skills either are undeveloped or just don't come to them at all, and it can always sort of be a bit of a swirl, and it seems to detract from the role and the job.
Yeah, and I certainly remember most of the sort of emotional intelligence training that I attended as I was going through my legal career was either it was pitched at a level that was above for me to be able to even get it, or it was pitched around how you can read somebody else and then I don't want to say exploit it, but something similar to that.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
and so the bit that, you know, the bit that it just missed a gap with me was understanding what emotions even are, why we have them, and then you know how we use them. So from that, even that very personal perspective, I didn't really feel that no one sort of sat down and said, right, these are the building blocks here. And they're much better at doing this in the education system now. So children who are growing up now will understand a lot of these things that weren't really readily available in sort of the education and even my sort of earlier working career.
We don't, we've sort of stumbled into my pet project, right? So one major outcome of that research that I did into BD, so you know what makes business development work essentially, was that many firms aren't investing in any kind of structured learning and development program, and it definitely doesn't happen through law school. It's a narrow degree that creates technical, you know, specialists and sort of really aims for the sort of the top 1%. But then, you know, you can land, and I've interviewed lawyers who've told me this day one in firm, they're in a pipeline meeting. And luckily, two of them had done law commerce, that they'd heard the word before, but they, you know, they really, and so on you go, and you've invested so much in your career that you don't want to admit that you don't know. It's also this idea of the expert and achievement, as you say, and my career hinges on me doing well at business development. I know I've got to get clients, but that idea too that lawyers need steps that are broken down, feel safe, to be able to admit vulnerability, that is missing. And so people, I think, feel often very uncontained, emotionally uncontained in law firm systems. And then, you know, BD are coming in and, well, you've got to do this and you've got to do that. And what have you done this? And if you've done that, well, we're going to be doing this. Lawyers aren't saying anything because for all those reasons, you know, don't speak unless you know the correct answer. You're meant to be the expert here. And around we go. And that's that fee earner, fee burner tension that I wrote about in that book with Genevieve. But more than that, I think it creates the culture. That idea that you're saying that there's, you know, step by step, and that and starting with, well, what is an emotion? And that, you know, the generation, the Gen Zs and the millennials may have a bit more of a clue, but maybe not in the context of what they're expected to do. It's in quite a high stakes game, their career. You know, a lot of observation, a lot of people, you know, and also big responsibility.
Yeah.
I think I don't know when I'm talking to law firm leaders, and I've been guilty of this myself, and I'm now an evangelist for the other way, is this idea of accidentally traumatizing lawyers with these expectations. You know, the eye rolls that happens in business services, like, oh, how hard is it? And I now know it is incredibly hard.
I think that's the other interesting thing in the law firm system, how it's set up is that, you know, there will be business development advisors, and then there are the lawyers who are meant to be doing that work. And well, who has the expertise, who holds the expertise there, and who executes it?
And that a little bit comes down to role, I think, like really having, because sometimes these roles are all very shaggy, you know, in terms of their boundaries, and it's not really super clear that the lawyer's role is to develop business, and when am I supposed to start doing this, and what does that look like exactly? What are the steps? And I know some firms have competencies, and I'm a big fan of them because I think they set it out. But there are difficult emotions in these systems that probably, I think, need more acknowledgement. And, you know, I think you've given some really good advice about what people can do for themselves. But then, you know, what would serve firms better perhaps is to really embrace some of this information that you're talking about, you know, how lawyers are sometimes run over, I guess, by some of these emotions, and people working in business services too. You know, law firms are emotional environments, whether people like it or not.
Well, they're full of humans. So, so yes, wherever there's humans, there will be emotions. Even if people are trying to squash them down, they're going somewhere. They're spilling out the sides. So there's nowhere that we can really remove that unless there's, you know, a room of inanimate objects. You know, it's not not going to get rid of the emotions. It's really about, well, which are the emotions that are going to help the business be more sustainable, be healthier, be more creative and innovative, and making sure that they're the emotions that are circulating, rather than some of the other emotions that tend to circulate, like that feeling of scarcity. Oh, where am I going to get my next $2 million from? How's this, we're in, certain practice areas at the moment are in a cycle of downturn, and there's a lot of fear around that.
Yeah.
So, cultures where there's shame around not having the right numbers or high enough revenue, these emotions are they're spreading around the organization. And that is, unless people have those emotional intelligence skills to notice that's happening, to be able to then process that and then put themselves in a more productive, resourceful emotion to get about their work, get about their personal interactions, then, we end up stuck and feeling really depleted and reactive.
Oh, that's so beautifully put. And I think we're coming to the end, and I do like to keep these short. I have run wildly over time before, as you probably could guess. But, I do like to keep them short. But I think for people who are watching this and perhaps have been practicing for a while, resonate with what you say, but also feel, oh, if I take the lid off those emotions, I'm going to go under. I'm not going to be, I'm going to crack up. I'm going to, I'll be a blubbering mess in front of the CEO, and I don't want that. I mean, it's May, we're in REM season, it's high pressure. Everyone's feeling, oh no. Yeah, what's your advice around that? Like, what you're saying is so sensible. I don't think the firm's going to do anything. I'm on my own with this.
Yeah. And there's a variety of thoughts I have there. One is that we can be there can be absolutely that reluctance to let the emotion go. And of course we have to behave professionally in context. We can't just be firing off all over the place. So there is the way that we need to behave in our workplace communities. There is science that shows that if you do let an emotion happen, it will pass in about 90 seconds. Choosing the right time for that to happen is part of the way that you navigate this. But what we often do is we keep pushing. As soon as the emotion creeps in, particularly if it's uncomfortable, we might push it down, we might suppress it. We would often distract ourselves by getting back into work, by scrolling social media, by walking to the fridge, and just doing a whole heap of other things, or sort of numbing techniques. And so when we're doing that, yes, those emotions sort of get suppressed and stuck there. And so I would sort of recommend to anyone who feels as though they're actually not sure how to work with that, is to find somebody who can support them. And again, that could be a psychotherapist, a counselor, a trained coach, somebody who can help them sort of navigate those emotions, with support, if that's what they feel that is going to be helpful for them. Because I understand that reluctance, because we become so well practiced at pushing down those emotions and ignoring them, and then they spill out at a time when you don't want them to spill out.
Well, that's true too, isn't it? Like, in being able to sort of be courageous and take that step to say, I've got these emotions, whether I like them or not. I can't keep blaming others. It's up to me. And even if people feel that they don't have enough courage to, get outside support, the thing that you spoke about in the middle, which is where they just recognize that they're having these emotions, and that when they go into the meeting that they're dreading perhaps, or that it's going to be difficult or is challenging, or even if it's with their own team member, that they sort of realize that they've got these emotions, and that they're sharing those emotions, and that those emotions are contagious. So doing something for yourself, acknowledging them is the first step, and not being terrified of them, the overwhelm.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's right. And I think that message that those emotions are part of being human, that is the human experience.
Yeah.
And so, and it's natural. Everybody, everybody has these emotions, and the better you can be at being able to regulate them and then sort of leverage the emotions that are going to help you achieve your goals can be super helpful.
Yeah, so in the last minute or so that we have, I think, if we end on an optimistic note, there's plenty that people can do. They don't need to be subject to these sort of difficult emotions, and they don't need to spread them around. Cultures can be improved by people taking some responsibility, particularly for leaders. Leaders have that sort of duty of care for the people that they're leading and the people that they're working alongside, but to increase their self-awareness if they're feeling these complex emotions. Not only will it help them, but it will help the firm. The firm will be able to work like a team and to achieve business development goals. And it's a challenging, competitive environment that the more skills you have in your kit bag, including your own self-awareness, the better the firm's going to perform and the better you'll do as well.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Katie, I can't thank you enough. I really enjoyed talking to you about these complex emotions because they are there, aren't they? They're there and they do impact performance, not only business development. Business development is just one aspect of being in a firm. They impact everything really, client relationships, collegial relationships. And I think they can be scary.
Mm. Yeah, well, as you say, they're contagious and they are what prompts us to act. So we are driven by them.